Did W ever have an opportunity to be involved with Unrivaled?
They did, yeah. We did offer equity before we launched, yeah.
And they turned it down?
They did.
What does Unrivaled do to set itself apart and set itself as a potential standard or a comparison for the W?
Everything we're fighting for is salary, benefits, equity in the league. Like, we have all these things without needing to be asked at Unrivaled. Like, we want for nothing here. And not only do we meet like the minimum standards that we're begging for in the WNBA, we exceed.
Did the WNBA have an opportunity to be involved with Unrivaled? They did, and they turned it down. That's Napheesa Collier, co-founder of Unrivaled, sitting across from The Athletic, casually dropping what should be a bombshell revelation. But here's what makes this moment fascinating: the way she delivers it. No emotion, no drama, just matter-of-fact confirmation that the league rejected equity in what's now being positioned as their biggest competitor. And that calculated calmness? That's not accidental. Because what we're watching unfold here is a masterclass in manufactured leverage, and the media is eating it up without asking the most obvious questions.
Part and set itself as a potential standard or a comparison for the W.
Everything we're fighting for is salary, benefits, equity in the league. Like, we have all these things without needing to be asked at Unrivaled. Like, we want for nothing here. And not only do we meet like the minimum standards that we're begging for in the WNBA, we exceed them. Players see here what professional life should look like, and so it's really hard when you've been given that to accept less when you know what it could be like.
Many pro sports leagues operate as monopolies. What's the value in creating something fresh like Unrivaled to challenge that and change that?
It allows us to have leverage. We don't have to just accept anything that you give us, because if you don't give us what we're owed, like, we have other places that we can go.
Everything we're fighting for is salary, benefits, equity in the league. We have all these things without needing to be asked at Unrivaled. We want for nothing here. Listen to the language carefully, without needing to be asked. The implication is clear. The WNBA makes you beg for basic standards, but Unrivaled just hands them over. But here's the context that interview conveniently skips. Unrivaled is a 3-on-3 league that played 8 weeks of basketball in Miami. The WNBA is a 40-game season across 12 cities with actual infrastructure, medical staff, and established revenue streams. Comparing their compensation models is like comparing a pop-up restaurant to a national chain and asking why the pop-up has better ambiance. And speaking of medical staff, we need to talk about what happened when players actually got injured.
It allows us to have leverage. We don't have to just accept anything that you give us, because if you don't give us what we're owed, like, we have other places that we can go.
It allows us to have leverage? If they don't give us what we want, we have other places we can go? And we still have shill paid WNBA media with their acting like chickens with their heads cut off, pretending like they don't see the clear conflict of interest that's going on here?
It allows us to have leverage. We don't have to just accept anything that you give us, because if you don't give us what we're owed, we have other places that we can go. There it is, the entire strategy laid bare. Unrivaled isn't being positioned as a complementary league or an off-season opportunity. It's being weaponized as leverage against the WNBA. But let's examine that leverage claim with actual evidence. When Aaliyah Boston tore her meniscus in Miami on January 31st, where did she immediately fly? Indianapolis, to see the Fever's medical team. When Satou Sabally suffered a shoulder injury at Unrivaled, where did she go for treatment? Straight back to Dallas and the Wings medical staff. The league with the best doctors, the best recovery team, the best medical staff the WNBA could never compete with, somehow couldn't retain their injured players for treatment. That's not leverage, that's a fundamental dependency that completely undermines the entire narrative.
The show media is crazy over here in the WNBA. It's ridiculous. They completely ignore the most obvious issue, and it just doesn't exist. They ignore the most obvious issue and they say, hey, pay attention over here, and we won't even address this. Napheesa Collier. Another interview that you guys do that makes you look worse and worse and worse and worse. Look at some of the reactions. The more I hear Collier speak, the less respect I have. Damn. The main choice.
Now watch Collier double down on her end-of-season comments about WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. I still back what I said. Trying to get things done behind closed doors isn't working, so I felt like I needed to stand up and say it publicly. I think it helped give us a little bit of leverage, a little bit of momentum, public pressure. That's the strategy. Call out the commissioner at the WNBA finals, create a media spectacle, and claim it generates leverage for CBA negotiations. But here's the problem with that theory. It didn't work. The public response wasn't universal support for the players. It was divided, messy, and in many cases, actively hurt their position. WNBA fans who'd supported the league for decades pushed back hard against players who seemed to be biting the hand that built the platform they're standing on. The owners gained sympathy. The players lost credibility with a significant portion of the fan base. So when Collier says she thinks it helped give them leverage, the evidence suggests otherwise. What it actually did was expose a fundamental misunderstanding of how public opinion works when you're not the underdog anymore.
They completely ignore the most obvious issue, and it just doesn't exist. They ignore the most obvious issue and they say, hey, pay attention over here, and we won't even address this. Napheesa Collier. Another interview that you guys do that makes you look worse and worse and worse and worse. Look at some of the reactions. The more I hear Collier speak, the less respect I have. Damn. The main choice.
I was actually surprised by the reaction. Basketball people would hear it, but it definitely reached farther than I thought it would. People received it positively, but even if they hadn't, I feel really strongly that what I said was the right thing. Here's where the media literacy gap becomes critical. Yes, it reached farther than expected. Yes, some people received it positively, but some people doesn't mean most people, and reaching farther doesn't mean reaching better. The reaction was mixed at best, hostile at worst, and the idea that public pressure on Cathy Engelbert helped the players' negotiating position is contradicted by what happened next. The WNBA didn't cave, the owners didn't panic, the league continued operating exactly as it had been, and if anything, gained public support for standing firm against what many fans perceived as entitled demands from players who just experienced their most successful season ever. And that brings us to the most revealing part of this entire media strategy.
Today, ESPN, The Athletic, old legacy media, starving, desperate, in dire need of attention. So what do they do to get that attention? They say, hey, WNBA players, hey, Breanna, Stewart, Napheesa Collier, come on our platform and speak your piece. And every time they go on these platforms, every time they tell their side of the story, it gets worse and worse and worse for them. The big thing at the end of the season when Napheesa Collier calls out Cathy Engelbert, calls out the WNBA, calls out Adam Silver, it was all downhill from there. Pay us what you don't owe us at the All-Star Week. It was all downhill from there.
This is where the original commentary nails something crucial. ESPN, The Athletic, legacy sports media platforms that are desperate for engagement in a fragmenting media landscape. And what do? They give WNBA players with clear conflicts of interest a platform to speak their piece, without challenging the fundamental contradictions in their arguments. Every time Napheesa Collier or Breanna Stewart do these interviews, every time they position Unrivaled as leverage against the WNBA while simultaneously being co-founders of Unrivaled, the conflict of interest becomes more glaring. And every time the interviewer nods along without asking the hard follow-up questions, the media's credibility erodes a little more. The interviewer actually says, many pro sports leagues operate as monopolies. What's the value in creating something fresh like Unrivaled to challenge that? That's not journalism. That's a promotional setup. A real journalist would ask, you're co-founders of Unrivaled while simultaneously negotiating a CBA with the WNBA. How do you respond to critics who say that's a conflict of interest? But that question never comes.
The quote, we have other places that we can go. Napheesa Collier discusses the relationship between the WNBA and Unrivaled. Now, we have other places that we can go. You've always had other places you can go. So just that now that Unrivaled is here, Athletes Unlimited is here, just because these two second-rate 3v3 Unrivaled gimmick league, just because they're here, doesn't change the fact that you've always had places to go. You always could have gone overseas. You always could have gone to Russia. Shout out to Brittany. You always could have went to Australia. You always could go to all these other places. So if you think that Unrivaled actually puts pressure on the WNBA, I am not sure where you are getting.
We have other places that we can go. The rallying cry, the leverage play. Except it's built on a foundation that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. WNBA players have always had other places to go. Russia paid better than Unrivaled for years. Turkey, China, Australia, multiple European leagues have been options for decades. Brittany Griner was making over $1 million annually playing overseas before her detention in Russia. That's more than Unrivaled's reported compensation. So what's actually changed? Not the existence of alternatives. What's changed is that two WNBA stars now own one of those alternatives and are using their media access to position it as revolutionary leverage. That's the innovation here. Not the league itself, but the marketing strategy around it. And that strategy relies entirely on media platforms willing to uncritically amplify the message without examining the underlying contradictions. Which brings us to the ratings problem that nobody wants to talk about.
Let's talk about some media real quick. We have Annie Costable giving bullet points for all Unrivaled this year. Oh, this was up, and this was up, and this was up, and then this was up, and then this was up, and then that was up. This is an example of being used to having fans that just eat everything up, and now a new fan base is here and they see through the bullshit. That's what this is an example of. And he's done a great job reporting about the CBA, what's going on, a lot of the insider stuff. Great job. But this right here is an example of we're going to lay the same script of just whatever we put out. The old guard fans will eat up. They won't question us. The old guard fans are stupid. Yeah, that might be true. But the new fans, man, they kind of see through the bullshit. They kind of cut through the weeds. Look at all these bullet points that we have going on this post right here. And then we take a look at this. This is hilarious AI spin on low TV views. It does everything it can to avoid saying TV views were down. Jesus, this is advocacy, not journalism at all. Shit is embarrassing. Mark this as a paid sponsored post and have some integrity. Damn. Despite the cherry picking above, viewership ratings for Unrivaled was down about 30% from last year. League is dead unless they make drastic moves to save their TV streaming deal, especially after Skydance bought Paramount. Viewership is down around 40% last year. That number that I put in my video on Saturday, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. That's straight from Sports Business Journal. That's not some website I found off a whim to kind of go with what I think. No, that's Sports Business Journal, who's done a lot of good things reporting on Unrivaled, and they've kind of called it a buck on some other things regarding Unrivaled. I'm taking Sports Business Journal's word for it. When they say they're down 40%, I'm taking their word for it. And everybody that's been watching us cover these ratings, we see how much they're down. These are not good numbers. Year over year, playoffs is down. The biggest game of the season only came in third all time, and this is only their second season. They had to qualify their first bullet point to basically say, when literally nothing else was on, we did okay. Horrible. Unrivaled is now paying reporters for propaganda. Damn. An actual unbiased report. Objectively terrible, but I do love an attempt to spin positive. They're really trying to kill the W for this. Wild. Exactly. When you have this in your back pocket, when you have members of the media who will go out there and just spin some shit for you.
Sports Business Journal reported that Unrivaled's television viewership was down approximately 40% year over year from initial projections. That's not from some random blog or opinion site. That's Sports Business Journal, the industry standard for sports media analysis. But watch what happened when The Athletic's Breanna Merchant posted about Unrivaled's performance. Bullet points highlighting every possible positive spin. Social media engagement up. Streaming numbers cherry-picked. The all-important 1849 demographic mentioned only in the context of specific games, not season averages. And the response from people actually paying attention? AI spin on low TV views. This does everything it can to avoid saying TV views were down. This is advocacy, not journalism. Another comment, mark this as a paid sponsored post and have some integrity. That's the new WNBA media landscape. Legacy outlets so invested in the success narrative that they'll twist themselves into pretzels, avoiding straightforward reporting. Unrivaled's TV ratings declined significantly. That's the story. But instead of reporting that clearly, we get paragraphs of qualifications and alternative metrics designed to obscure the central fact. And here's why that matters for the leverage argument. If Unrivaled can't sustain television viewership in its second season, if the playoff games are finishing third in their time slot, If the 1849 demographic is consistently bottoming out in the ratings reports, then what leverage does it actually provide? The WNBA isn't worried about losing players to a league that can't maintain an audience. They're not concerned about competition from a 3-on-3 format that viewers are tuning out. The leverage only exists if Unrivaled represents a genuine alternative that could actually sustain these players' careers long-term, and the ratings suggest it doesn't. So let's synthesize what's actually happening here, because the media narrative and the reality are diverging rapidly. Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart co-founded Unrivaled. That's their right. It's entrepreneurial, it's ambitious, and creating new opportunities for women's basketball is genuinely valuable. But the moment they start using their WNBA platform and media access to position their private business venture as leverage against the league that built their brands, we've crossed into territory that requires scrutiny, not cheerleading. The conflict of interest is undeniable. They're negotiating a CBA with the WNBA while simultaneously promoting a competing league they own equity in. They're using interviews with major sports media outlets to publicly pressure the WNBA commissioner while their own business benefits from positioning itself as the superior alternative. And the media is facilitating this without asking the obvious questions about whose interests are actually being served. We have other places we can go. Sounds empowering until you examine what those places actually offer. Unrivaled pays well for 8 weeks. Then what? The WNBA season is 40 games plus playoffs, with established medical infrastructure, national television contracts, and growing revenue streams. When Aaliyah Boston got injured, she didn't trust Unrivaled's medical team with her recovery. She flew to Indianapolis. That tells you everything about which league has the actual infrastructure to support these players' careers. The public pressure strategy hasn't worked the way they expected. Calling out Kathy Engelbert at the WNBA Finals didn't generate universal support. It created division. It turned portions of the fan base against the players, it gave the owners public sympathy, and it didn't force the league to capitulate to demands, which was presumably the goal. And now we're seeing the media apparatus bend itself into knots, trying to spin declining Unrivaled ratings as somehow positive, when you have to cherry-pick streaming metrics and specific demographic performances for individual games to avoid discussing overall viewership trends. You're not reporting anymore. You're advocating. Here's the fundamental question that nobody in legacy media seems willing to ask these players directly. If Unrivaled is such a superior alternative, why do you need the WNBA at all? Why not just play your 8-week season, take your equity, enjoy your superior treatment, and let the WNBA be? Why the constant public pressure? Why the interviews positioning Unrivaled as leverage? Why the need to undermine the league that built the platform you're standing on? The answer is obvious. Unrivaled needs the WNBA far more than the WNBA needs Unrivaled. The players know it, the media knows it, and the leverage argument falls apart the moment you examine it critically. Without the WNBA, Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart don't have the name recognition to launch Unrivaled. Without the WNBA's decades of building infrastructure and credibility, there's no foundation for a startup 3-on-3 league to build on. Without the WNBA's television contracts and media relationships, Unrivaled doesn't get on TV at all. The dependency runs one direction, and it's not the direction the leverage narrative requires. What we're watching is a fascinating case study in how media narratives get constructed and maintained even when the underlying facts don't support them. The Athletic gives Collier a platform to claim public pressure worked without presenting any evidence that it actually did. ESPN amplifies the "we have other places to go" message without asking what happens when those places don't pan out. Legacy media reports on Unrivaled's performance using every metric except the one that matters most. Are people actually watching? And the new WNBA fanbase, the one that came in with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and actually pays attention to details, sees right through it. The comments on these articles aren't buying the spin. The more I hear Collier speak, the less respect I have. This is advocacy, not journalism. They have nothing without the WNBA. That's not coming from haters. That's coming from people who can read a ratings report and spot a conflict of interest. The old guard WNBA media could get away with this kind of uncritical cheerleading because the audience was small and loyal and didn't demand rigorous analysis. But the league has a bigger platform now. More scrutiny. More fans who expect sports media to actually ask tough questions instead of serving up softball interviews that read like promotional content. Unrivaled might survive. It might even thrive if it finds the right business model and audience, but positioning it as leverage against the WNBA, while the ratings decline and injured players flee back to their WNBA teams for medical care, isn't a sustainable strategy. It's a narrative that collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. And every time Napheesa Collier does one of these interviews, every time she doubles down on the public pressure strategy that demonstrably didn't work, Every time the media nods along without challenging the fundamental conflicts of interest at play, the gap between the narrative and reality grows wider. So here's the question for you. Do you think Unrivaled actually provides legitimate leverage for WNBA players in CBA negotiations, or is this a media narrative that benefits the co-founders more than it benefits the players they claim to represent? Because the evidence suggests those might not be the same thing. Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more analysis that actually examines the facts instead of just amplifying talking points, subscribe, because this story is far from over, and the next chapter of CBA negotiations is going to reveal exactly how much leverage these players actually have.